Good morning. My sermon today is taken from Matthew 13, verses 24 through 30 and 36 through 43, as well as Romans 8, verses 12 through 25. There we go. Now, I struggled with today's sermon. The gospel lesson seemed to be dealing with heaven and hell, and I didn't want to go there. So I turned to the letter to the Romans, and I got a little bit better feel. I can talk about having hope through the Holy Spirit. Then I read my email from Presbyterian Outlook on today's lectionary and got a small light bulb going off on a different way of looking into that gospel lesson. But before I began, I also looked at the Old Testament story, and my eyes stopped on that vision of angels ascending and descending on that ladder in Jacob's dream. Was that a vision of the future mentioned in Jesus' explanation of the parable today? When angels will be sent to sort the tares from the wheat? Even Psalm 139 of today's lectionary says, "If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there." Rarely have I ever seen such an obvious connection in all of the readings in the lectionary. So let me begin by using some of what Jill Duffield wrote in looking into the lectionary this week. We read today's gospel lesson on the parable of the wheat and the tares, and we learned that God does the sorting. Jill states, "I'm rather disappointed by this truth. I feel as if I could do a pretty good job separating out the weeds from the wheat. How hard can it be to tell them apart? Weeding, while hard work, is satisfying. While I do not enjoy the bending and the heat, I do like surveying the patch of a garden cleared of those life-sucking weeds. I've been known to use a chemical to eradicate weeds from between the cracks in the walkway up to my front door. Less labor and fairly effective, but an effort that must be repeated if the path is to stay pristine. I have friends who host an annual bonfire where they burn the branches and debris collected from around their farm throughout the year. And it is a fun occasion of food and drinks and s'mores. No weeping and gnashing of teeth, only laughter and a feeling of mission accomplished when the large pile has been reduced to ash." End quote. Now, I spoke myself last week about pulling weeds, clearing the fields of the thorns so the crops can grow strong. Now, my study Bible from the New King James Version, it had an interesting explanation. The tares, or weeds in this case, were probably darnel, which resembles wheat in its early stages of growth, but it's actually poisonous. And Roman law prohibited the sowing of darnel in another's field, which suggests that Jesus' story was very realistic for the time. The root systems of wheat and darnel become intertwined as the crop matures, which makes it difficult to uproot the weeds. And I think between Jill and I, we can show why uprooting those tares is better left to God. Jill Duffield continues, God does the sorting. God sends the angels to do the separating between weed and wheat. God deems when the timing is right to harvest the wheat and bundle up the weeds. In a culture in which we constantly sort and label, value, or discard, this message is radical and frustrating. Even today, when I ventured out to the grocery store and sorted through the avocados for the ones with the right ripeness, I also looked around at my fellow shoppers and made note of the few not wearing a mask. I did not make a neutral note either. I made a judgmental one. I assumed much about my non-mask wearing neighbors. I did not consider if they had a medical condition that would preclude them from wearing a mask. I did not give them the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps they inadvertently left the mask in the car, or maybe they were having a particularly challenging day and made a quick run to the store to get needed supplies. I glanced around the aisles and sorted the weeds from the wheat, confident in my assessments and justified in my judgment. And we do this all the time. End quote. Now, this story of Jill's really caught my attention, as I have the opposite thoughts. since I personally know two people who cannot wear a mask because of medical reasons, at least not for more than a few minutes, as well as a couple who won't wear them out of defiance. I look at those wearing a mask and I wonder how many of them are like me, wearing a mask only because our governor says to do so. They don't really believe the masks are doing any good, even somewhat fearful that they may cause more harm than good. I wonder whether those who are wearing the masks because they really believe they should, if they also believe and trust in God. Yeah, I'm judging too, but differently from how Jill is judging. So maybe it is best if we let God do the sorting. Jill continues. What is that person wearing? What accent do they have? What is the color of their skin? What kind of car are they driving? What bumper stickers on the back of that car? What church do they attend or not? What news network do they watch? We come to God not so much to ask as to tell God, I'm going to pull up the weeds. You're welcome. But God does the sorting. Jesus in this parable makes clear that indeed there are weeds and there is wheat. There is in fact a sinister force at work in the world, sowing that which is intent on destroying God's life-giving harvest. Ultimately, God will sort it all out, and evil will be definitively judged and addressed. However, such separating will be done by God, not us. We tend the field, do our best to plant seeds that will grow and nurture others. We sleep, we rest. We allow everything to grow no matter if we do not plant all of it, no matter if some of what comes up is weeds, because God will do the sorting. And when we attempt to separate the plants, we often end up destroying everything. The unintended consequences of wielding that powerful chemical all around our house. The truth is, we are not as good as we think we are at telling the difference between wheat and weed. Our assessments and assumptions are often completely wrong, and when we act on them, we are often utterly destructive to the entire ecosystem. Our assumptions about what is wheat and what is weed at best alienate us from one another, and at worst, kill each other. Jesus tells us to let everything grow until God sorts us out. And God's sorting is often very different than ours. Don't forget that other parable of the fig tree that didn't bear fruit. When it made sense to most to cut it down so it would stop wasting the soil, the gardener said instead, let me tend to it, nurture it, be patient, and see if it might not yet bear fruit. It could be that God has other ideas about the worth of what we deem weeds. It could be that those very weeds might yet be used for good. It might yet be that we really have no idea what is truly of value to God, in others, or even in ourselves. She continues, Garrett Kaiser tells a story in his memoir, A Dresser of Sycamore Trees, The Finding of Ministry, in which he is at a grocery store buying bananas to take to an older man he visits regularly. In front of him, as he checks out, is a woman with multiple orders and multiple forms of payment. Kaiser feels smug about his good deed while he judged a lady buying what he deemed to be trivial odds and ends, and doing so slowly. He writes, I watched her walk to her vehicle, feeling that same uncharitable impulse that makes us glance at the driver of the car we're passing just to get a look at the jerk. She got into the driver's seat of a van marked with the name of a local nursing home and filled to capacity with elderly men and women who had no doubt handed her their wish lists and checkbooks as soon as she cut the ignition. End quote. It is best for us to plant good seed, tend it, get some rest, but whatever comes up to grow, and ultimately let God do the sorting and judging, because we live in a world of COVID-19. We live in the world of economic crisis. We live in the world of dishonest political power. We live in the world of discrimination. We live in the world of inequalities. We live in the world of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. We live in the world of white supremacy. We live in a world of taxes. We live in the world of food shortages. We live in the world of homelessness. We live in the world of broken relationships. We live in the world of depression. We live in the world of loneliness. We live in the world of suicides. We live in the world of difficulties. We live in the world of joblessness. We live in the world of suffering. We live in the world of fake news, and we live in the world of social media rather than in society. We live in the world of fear. Oh yes, Satan has been very busy sowing those tares among the wheat. Overall, we can say that we are laden with many yokes throughout the day and night and throughout our life with one or the other of these many problems again and again. But our labor and burden can become easy and lighter with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. In our reading of Romans today, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. In times like these, suffering persists to the extent that we naturally ask why. Now that we have arrived at that stage of life where we wonder less about things past and present, but are more interested in things to come, there's a nagging itch that we still have about a few unanswered questions. Why do we feel up some days and down other days? Why were we not warned that growing old is not for sissies? Why do some people live beyond their allotted 70, while others depart this life far too soon? One question, though, has dogged folks since the dawn of the human race. Why does suffering exist? Why me? Why him? Why her? Why? Who in the entire Bible can we go to for a reliable answer to the question of suffering? Not an attorney, not a politician, not even a physician. None other than to the man who suffered for righteousness' sake. Folks, we all suffer, whether we are believers in Christ or not. None is exempt. We endure the suffering because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Hope is not a wish. It is an expectation of reality to be fulfilled when Christ shall come with shout and acclamation. Until then, my heart will go on singing. With joy I'll carry on. Mine eyes will see the glory of the coming of the Lord. Until then, while waiting patiently yet actively, my life will be consumed not by hysterical talk about doom and gloom, but by positive thoughts of our blessings. Salvation, peace, love, joy, happiness, comfort, contentment, good fortune, gladness, certainty, cheer, serenity, hope. But what about pain and suffering, you ask? One call, that's all. Dial your Father which art in heaven. Ask him to bear your burdens with you. But be sure to hear his answer when he tells you that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. It all depends on who and what you focus on. Acknowledge the negatives, but accentuate the positives in life. Medication helps alleviate physical pain, but a daily dose of positive thinking counteracts self-imposed mental suffering. Judging others and even judging yourself for your failings only leads to discontent and sleepless nights. Trust God to sort out those tares from the wheat. Live your life in trust and hope of the better world to come. Amen.